Yesterday afternoon, I watched the Minnesota Lynx play the New York Liberty in the WNBA on TV. And it's a fast-paced game, and they really work hard, and there's a lot of energy. And the color commentator kept saying how relentless the Minnesota Lynx defense was. And it was. Those women played with a lot of energy. They were there to help one another out, to cover for one another, and they really worked hard. And I thought about this relentlessness of theirs extends even beyond that. It goes to the fact that they are willing to sacrifice a great deal to be able to play on that team. They're willing to sacrifice their time and their energy. They're willing to go through grueling practices. They're willing to go through injuries and get through injuries. They're willing to play for one another and with one another. They're even willing to sacrifice their bodies and give up certain foods. They're willing to make sure they have proper nutrition and they eat well and they drink well so their body is in good shape to be able to play the game. They have, what I would say, embraced the struggle. They've embraced the struggle that it takes to be able to play in the WNBA. And if we look at today's readings are basically saying that in order to truly be a follower of the Lord, in order to truly have faith, we have to be willing to embrace the struggle. Because it is not easy to be a Christian. It's not easy to live as a Christian. It's not easy to be part of that. We have to be willing to embrace that. Jeremiah had to embrace that in the first reading when he was willing to do the Lord's will, even though people were going to torture him and abuse him. The letter to the Hebrews says, you need to be willing to struggle. And you're fortunate you haven't had to shed blood to struggle, but you need to be willing to embrace that struggle. Just as Jesus did in his own life. And Jesus tells us in the gospel, it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a division. And you might have to sacrifice some things. You might have to give some things up. You might have to sacrifice your time. You might have to sacrifice some of your treasure. You might have to sacrifice some of your relationships. You might have to sacrifice all sorts of things in order to embrace the struggle that it means to be Christian. A few years ago when I was here and I was walking through the school visiting classrooms, and I think it was a first grade classroom I was walking through, and a little boy was telling me how much he enjoyed being at Mass the Sunday before. And the little girl by him said, we don't go to church on the weekend. We said, oh, and she said, yeah, my parents say we have other things to do on the weekend. Well, that's not really embracing the struggle. That's not really being relentless. And as a matter of fact, to come to Mass here on the weekend is really the bare minimum. And not that that should be completely embracing the struggle either. Not just being here, which is important, but we also need to be willing to embrace the struggle in our daily lives. In the way that we treat other people, in the way we model ourselves after Jesus, in the way that we are willing to live a simple life, in the way that we were willing to sacrifice and give of ourselves for the sake of the gospel and the sake of our faith. We have to be willing to do that in the way that we act, in the way that we think, and in everything we do. And we are not going to measure up to what Jesus did. And we are probably not going to measure up to what Jeremiah did. But that doesn't mean it's not important for us to try.